Welcome to Azur Lane Meta. Today we are going to be starting the first of a series called Meta Analysis, where we take a look at what is being played in exercises. Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be doing the first edition of a meta-analysis. Now, this is something that I want to do for the channel. We're going to be talking about on the channel a bunch of different strategies and synergies amongst fleets. We're going to be talking about different sort of meta fleets that you can do and how to equip them and things like that. And then we're going to show examples of how they work in battle. But one of the things that we also want to show is to figure out what other people are playing, what is being successful, and part of playing in the meta is countering what other people are playing. So we need to know what other people are playing, and that will also help us decide on what is actually showing and realizing the best results. So we are going to be here on the channel taking a look at what some of the defense fleet usages are going to look like in Azur Lane. So this is the exercises, so the PvP portion of the game, and this looks at the defense fleets of the top 100 ranked players in exercises. And we take a look at this between the hours of 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time and midnight of the next day on the last day of a season. Now, season's every 2 weeks, so on the last day of the season, in that 6-hour window is when we're looking, because that is the time period that most people are going to be having their best defense fleets out. That is the time period that's the end of the season, so that it's the closest to the real actual end ranking. Now, currently I'm doing these manually, and I'm only doing them on one server. There are 4 English servers. So it takes me about an hour to do these, and so I put a snapshot at some period in that hour. And note, I'm a human being that has things to do, so it's not always going to be exactly at midnight, which would be the final standings. It would be somewhere. I try to do it as late as possible, but not past 11 Mountain Standard Time, because I don't want to actually miss out on it. So I try to do it as close between the hours of 10 and 11, but it changes based on what my schedule looks like when I'm going to be recording these. And so keep that in mind when you're like, if someone you're like, oh, I know for a fact that I ranked on this server and I don't see myself here. That might be because you did your last rush after I recorded these. And so this is not the final standings. This is like if you were trying to record a marathon and try to figure out who you think is the winner, but you can only record 100 meters before the end of the race, not the actual finish line. And so you'll get a pretty good set of like where people are positioned, but it can always change in that last 100 meters. So just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that these are defense fleets. Defense fleets, well, they're not that super important in the fact that some people like to prefer to use meme fleets for the defense fleets. Also, there's a thing called making your defense fleet farmable, and that is a strategy to increase your amount of points for the season. We try to mitigate the amount of teams that we have do that, because at the end of the season, after you have cleared through every exercise you've had for the season, which I think is like 210 exercises or something like that, you put on your strongest defense fleet to try and lock in your position. So we're trying to get as many of these people to put in their strongest defense fleet and lock their positions. So far we have counted 72 of the ships, or of the people, to have a defense fleet that is legitimate. So that's why we won't see always 100 here. Almost never we'll see 100 because sometimes people are too lazy to switch up their defense fleets, or they haven't done their run because, like I said, with the hour thing, um, they might not have done their run yet, or just a whole host of reasons why sometimes we get some unideal fleets. So we don't record those in this data because that's not really relevant to what we're trying to figure out. If you can just wipe over the fleet because it's a meme fleet or a joke fleet, it's not too relevant to play around, right? So our criteria is going to be pretty low bar, a low hurdle to jump over. It's going to be you have to have 6 ships. They all have to be limit break, maxed out, limit breaked, and they have to have a power for the Vanguard and the main fleet both have to be over 10,000. That's a very low hurdle to clear, in case you guys are wondering. If you're getting the top 100, you probably have an exercise win rate over 95%, and that means that you're going to have some decent ships. If you have you have ships that are under 10,000 power in your fleet, that's because it's a farmable fleet. I mean, yeah, sometimes some of the newer ships aren't totally like max affinity and 120 yet because they're new. But if you put them with 5 other good ships, you'll be way over 10,000. To put an example, there's this one guy who always gets a top 100, and so I always put him in here because technically he beats the requirements, and he really likes the gold bullion. And he has this gold bullion, max affinity, level 120, oath. He has an oath. Everything's maxed out. It is the strongest gold bullion that you can have, and he puts it with a full meta like German fleet, and then he just swaps in the one bullion, and it meets all the requirements to not be a joke fleet. So I leave it in there. So am I saying that the gold bullion is meta? Maybe. But yes, it is a low hurdle, so you will see some fleets that are not ideal. A lot of times they'll be classified in other when we get down to the classifications here. But now with all of that kind of disclaimers on what we're looking at here, we can actually get into it. So we are going to record this every season, so we can see here on this is the season ending on November 24th, and we are also recorded the season ending on November 10th. And so we're hoping to, in a year have all every 2 weeks. So that would be like, what, 26 seasons in the year. So we're hoping to get that, and then we can get a nice kind of consistency, see as things flow and what becomes meta. The reason why I'm doing a report this week specifically is because this is the last season that we will not be able, or that there was no one that could use a Warspite retrofit. Next season, by the end of the season, a lot of these top players are going to have a maxed out Warspite retrofit because it becomes eligible this week because the event will be over. So we want to kind of see and have a baseline of what the hero meta looked like. And we're going to call this portion basically the hero meta. It's been existing since Heroes Retrofit was added to the English servers. And you'll see why in a little bit, why we call it the hero meta. But now when Warspite Retrofit comes out, she is a counter to hero. And so we expect to see hero meta or fleets to kind of decrease and more of the kind of Warspite things to increase. And that's just a hypothesis. We'll see if that actually happens. But this is just to kind of get our baseline of what the hero meta has existed, because, I mean, we've been in this meta for a while too. So only having 2 weeks, while it's not great, you'll get the sense that this will be pretty much what it's been for months now. So how this spreadsheet works is basically each of these weeks has a different kind of collection here, and then we make a pivot table basically to try and figure out what ships go together. So here, this is for the week November ending on the 10th, but we have one for the 24th and presumably every week going forward. We can see that the most fleets that we have for a flagship is going to be Nagato, and of the fleets that have Nagato, most of them use Amagi. we have a couple Akagis, and every one that uses Nagato Akagi, as expected, would use a Kaga. We see the most common Namagi fleet is what we're going to call it, the Nagato Amagi, is Hiru, but we also see a lot of enterprises as well, and a couple other, like what I'd call big meta ships that we throw into the the mix. And that's kind of largely what we see from this pivot table. On the Vanguard pivot table, this is less important because a lot of Vanguard synergies are just not as existent. You kind of just put the best Vanguard ships that you can have. That's just kind of how the PvP works currently. And so we see that pretty much everyone throws in like a Yukikaze as their most relevant. We see Juno's very popular, Belfast very popular, Jinsu. So our most popular vanguards are we're gonna be having is the Belfast Juno Yukikaze Vanguard and the Juno St. Louis Yukikaze Vanguard. And then we also see kind of a decent amount of vanguards with Jinsu Juno Yukikaze, or Aurora Jinsu Yukikaze, or Ainami Belfast Yukikaze. Those are the kind of other formats that we see the most of. So here we have kind of like a little tool here. I call it like the heat map. What it basically does is you read across. So you start here and you pick a ship, any ship that during the time of the season that we were in was played at all, and you pick a ship that you want. So let's say you want to look at Yukikaze, and you want to see what was Yukikaze played with. So you read across, and the percentage here you'll see is the percent of all fleets that had Yukikaze in it, what percent of them had this specific ship? So we see, a third of them had Belfast. We see like 41% had Jinsu, over half had Juno, and then if we go look, we see St. Louis made up 17.5%, 65% ish for Amagi, 21% for Enterprise. Hero made up 49%, and we can see that 92% of fleets that played Yukikaze also played Nagato, so you can kind of get a sense of what fleets go together, or what ships go together. Sorry. So if we go look at, like, you want to say, let's play Jinsu. Sorry, we see that Belfast is very popular with Jinsu. We see the most popular ship, at least for the Vanguard, is Yukikaze. 3/4 of all fleets that play Jinsu play Yukikaze. We see Ainami and Aurora also see some play, and Juno as well. And then basically you are going to playing with Nagato in the main fleet with it, but we do see some Enterprise here. And then if you look at fleets that are kind of more one-dimensional, like if we look at like Graf Zeppelin or something like that, we see that 100% of fleets that played Graf Zeppelin played Bismarck. That's like kind of self-explanatory, but we just kind of see that show up here. This sort of thing is kind of less relevant for ships that were only played once, like the Unicorn right here, where there's only one person that had a Unicorn in their fleet. So like 100% for the 5 other ships that person once played. So it's really kind of a tool that's more relevant for ships that are played in a lot of fleets. And so yeah, this is just a tool that we put together. It's a little heat map to see like what sort of things go together. So if we look at the general tab, we just look. This is the raw numbers of usage. So this is not looking at just like the percentage of relevant, or what we deemed as legitimate fleets that use these. So we see Nagato and Yukikaze being up there over 70%, which is pretty much defined if we do a tier system as tier 1 or maybe even tier 0, where you want to see those there. And we see Amagi, Hiru, Enterprise, and then the Akaga's fleet kind of works there, and we see some other fleets there. Anything in this kind of 1-2 category, take with a grain of salt. Definitely the 1 category, take with a grain of salt. And so we just move across the week, and we're just going to continue this over as the weeks progress or as the seasons progress. And then it just goes into our little chart here where we see, it's only 2 data points right now because we only have 2 weeks recorded of data, but we expect this to go further. So I'll kind of explain in a little bit about what these sort of fleets on the right look like and how we categorize them. Well, we can see that Namagi fleets make up just under half of the fleets that make the top 100. The Ikaga fleets, which have been existent since nearly the beginning of the game as PvP competitive, still alive. And then we see, the most relevant after that is kind of this HMS, the British fleets. We see kind of, even in this 2 data point session, we kind of see the decrease in all the 3 major IJN fleets, the Namagi, Ikaga, and the Bunny fleet, all decreased from last season to this, or I guess 2 seasons ago to this last season. And that is because, my theory, we see an uptake in the HMS Queen Elizabeth fleet and the HMS just like Backline fleet. And I'm assuming that's because we have people that are prepping for Warspite retrofit to drop and kind of wanting to test out some things. Also, Warspite retrofit, while the retrofit's not released, like you can't fully retrofit her. I guess modernization is not available without the item, but you can retrofit her all the way up to the final modernization. I think the skills afterward too. So the final new skill and the modernization, but you can get all the stat boosts up to that. So actually, Warspite regular, because you can do like 90% of her retrofit already, is seeing play because now she's got significantly better stats, even though she's not completely done with her retrofit until this week. So we do see that. I mean, a lot of these other fleets are kind of like barely around. So the difference in change from one season to the next season is not a big difference. So if we go look at this last season specifically and what the breakdown is, we can kind of talk about what each of these fleets are. So Namagi is pretty self-explanatory. We need a Nagato and a Namagi. If we see those 2, it gets put in Namagi. Now, 33% or so of the total fleets play Namagiryuu, or basically Namagi with Hiru. So that's like almost 2/3 of that portion there for Namagi. But there are other fleets that play Enterprise, a lot to play Enterprise. Like I said, it's Formidable, and things like that. But in the future, we also classify it by Namagi instead of Namagiryuu, because in the future we could see, like next week, we could see Warspite Retrofit dropped into the Namagi fleet. We could see when PR2 drops, we can see a bunch of those backliners dropped into a Namagi fleet. When Yamato drops, we can kind of see Namagi be dropped into Namagi as well. So one of the reasons we chose to classify Namagi this way is so that we can kind of get a consistent over time, because generally you're still just going to play Nagato Amagi combo for their synergy, and then you throw in the big bad ship, the big bad best ship that you can find. Monarch, I think, is another one that gets played in there too. We go to the Ikaga fleets. This is the next most relevant. Most of the fleets in the Ikaga fleet are Nagato, but it is just a classification of Akagi and Kaga. So we do see fleets that use Amagi as their center ship. We also see fleets that use Monarch, Enterprise, any of the big ones, but most of them, a majority of them, are going to use Nagato because that is the best version. Then we see the Bunny fleet and the Swan fleet. These are both basically Nagato plus their respective carrier pair. The bunnies being Hiru Soru, and the swans being Shokaku Zukaku. And not too relevant, but they're there, and so we record them separately. One thing that is not recorded here is going to be fleets that are Nagato and Hiru, but no Amagi. And the reason why that's kind of important is a lot of those fleets just play the biggest next fleet that they have. We aren't going to classify them in anything. We put them in other. they make up a some of a portion of other. There's other things in other, but they do make up a decent portion of other. And I just kind of feel like these ships are people, or these fleets are people that did not start the game in time for Amagi, but they did play the game for Nagato, and so they don't have the Amagi, and they would probably play the Amagi if they had it, but they don't, so they play the best other ship that they have. And so there's a few of those out there, and with the, but we're not going to classify them in any of the standard IJN fleets there. So then we move on to the British. We have basically broke up into two sections. So HMS is anyone that plays Queen Elizabeth is there was kind of search. Now in theory, you could play Queen Elizabeth without any other British ships, and it would be kind of awkward. But I'm expecting that everyone who's playing Queen Elizabeth is going to play a large British team generally. And this is probably the most popular of the HMS fleets, but it's certainly not a majority, as you can see here. The HMS Backline is any two ships that are from HMS in the backline. We started this off doing it with battleships, thinking like Monarch and Warspite and Hood and King George V, which actually is pretty relevant in PvP. A lot of them play it because of how large that IJN meta is. But we see that Centaur and Formidable are added to a lot of fleets. Centaur specifically is added to a lot of these British fleets that don't have Queen Elizabeth in them. So we kind of just said any two HMS because we didn't want to have a separate Centaur section, a separate Queen Elizabeth section, and a separate Backline section. So most of those fleets are fleets that have like Centaur replacing the Queen Elizabeth. Basically, they're like pretty much like it's all of them have Monarch, and then they play like a big British backline like Formidable or Warspite or Hood, and then they play Centaur or Queen Elizabeth. That's generally what those two are. So we do break them up because Queen Elizabeth is the most popular, but there. So then we go to the USS. The USS carriers, there are three main USS carriers that are going to be used in PvP. We have Enterprise, probably being the best one, Essex, and Saratoga with her retrofit. If you play two US carriers, then we put you in this category. It's not a huge category because just carriers are not very strong in PvP. But the USS carriers are probably some of the best. Although Centaur and Formidable are pretty well formidable. Um, so yeah, you just need to have like two carriers from the USS fleet. USS Battleships. This was originally going to be called uh, the WASD, or for the Washington South Dakota fleet. That used to be really popular in the meta, but it isn't so far. Largely because one, the event was so long ago and hasn't had a rerun that any new players that would use the fleet just don't have Washington and thus can't actually build the fleet. And all the old players that were from that event have plenty of better options. So you have to kind of be a diehard fan to play that. If we do get a rerun of that event, I expect it to be played a little bit more just because of accessibility. Washington is a hardship to get. You had to be playing since pretty close to the very beginning to get Washington. So that is why we added in just USS battleships in general, because the native fleet, which plays basically the South Dakota class, and it's kind of just like a big gun fleet, similar to the HMS. HMS's big gun fleet is just better, but some people play the USS big gun fleet. That would be like Alabama, South Dakota, um, Alabama, South Dakota, Massachusetts. That's it. So we put those together because we think, one, we want to give some patronage to the earlier dominance of Washington, South Dakota fleets that were able to kind of deal with the Ikaga fleets. Second, we want to, you know, give a special like kind of area for those what I'd call USS big gun fleets. And then third, we expect that USS big gun fleets to actually be relevant in the future when we see PR2 drop and we see Seattle and um, Georgia kind of come into the game. And then finally, we're going to do the KMS fleets. I mean, KMS, you pretty much have to play Bismarck if you're playing it. I don't think there's any way to really ever play it. So putting KMS and Bismarck is kind of redundant. But when we get the second PR, I expect that this fleet's actually going to be actually relevant. You can play Bismarck, Graf, and FDG, and you have actual ships to do. Rune is decent, like in that fleet, and you can actually do things. So those are the fleets that we're actually going to be tracking, and then others for everything else. Obviously, I already mentioned that the Nagato-Hiryu plus big ship fleets are going to be put in other rather than in a specific category. Um, a lot of these fleets just don't have an identity. They're just three big ships, someone's three best ships that they have. Because in this game, if you have like 6 ships, max affinity, like max leveled, and you equip them properly, you can pretty much beat a lot of teams. And so some people just have that and they pick their favorite 6 ships, and they don't really have a synergy. Also, ships like Litario and Jean Bart have really good base stats, but their skills are not super relevant in PvP. And so they're usually thrown in like by themselves with, and they're obviously French and Italian. They don't have like a regular faction, regular of the main factions at least. And they just throw them with big relevant ships, Monarch, Enterprise, whatever big ships they can throw in. Those get thrown into other. They don't really have an identity. They just kind of throw in their biggest ship they have. And then the other ones are what I'd call synergistic fleets that are just not going to see relevant play through the history, where I don't think that, like, most weeks they'll be 0 and they'll pop up 1 or 2 every season because just that's what happens. Um, and they do have synergy, but they're just not worth recording. Notable examples are like collab event ships, like the AI, the Kasuna AI, or the Neptunia, those sort of events. Like, some people take those fleets and they have a lot of synergy together, and you can make them. Um, but like, there was like one of them, I think, in this whole thing. So those fleets are going to be also classified in another. I haven't decided yet whether the Muse fleet is going to be in this category. We'll have to see how it performs. If any faction is going to be pulling over like 4 or 5%, we're going to give its own kind of section, because if you're having that much success, then we're going to want to track that. So we'll see if the Muse fleet is actually that relevant. Um, I think just because the fact that we are basically going to get a PR2 ship before actual PR2, like like I think it might be actually relevant, because like in the other servers they got PR2 and then they got the Muse ship, which is like a copy of it, or like a weaker copy of it, but we don't have the original. So the weaker copy of it, when we get it, might actually be relevant. I'll have to test it out when it gets out there, but that's neither here nor there. So this is kind of the meta breakdown, meta analysis that we're going to be having for November. I expect to take a look at this after a few seasons with Warspite Kai out, and we'll see kind of how this progression of the meta analysis for exercises progresses. Hopefully this was helpful in kind of seeing what is topping. For those of you who don't pay attention, enlightening. For those of you who are very engrossed in it, you're probably very familiar with um, Namagiryuu fleets being everywhere. But this is just a confirmation. Kind of shows some of the other fleets that exist. So thank you guys for watching, and you know we're gonna continue this to be hopefully a series going on, and maybe as we go on we can get better automation features for collecting this sort of data. Maybe do it for more than just one server, so we have larger numbers. And yeah, I think we also are going to collect. I might have a collection of like the names who have topped, and see if we can spot repeated toppers throughout the repeated seasons. And go from there. I might make this available. I haven't decided on if I'm going to make this spreadsheet available to everyone. But if you do join the Discord, that's probably where I'm going to at least make the announcement of where I'm going to make this available if you guys are interested. If not, then that's that. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. We're going to be making a series of this, so every few months or so, or whenever the meta kind of changes, we're going to make a video like this, hopefully a little bit shorter. Sorry if it's a little long. Thank you guys for those of you who watched all the way through it. And once again, if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to see kind of more in depth about what's going on, please join the Discord.